Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin. We have a great guest, Governor DeSantis. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure. I read your book, The Courage to Be Free, Florida's Blueprint for America's Revival. Let me ask you this, and I don't always ask everybody this question. This is a fantastic book. It's easy to read. It walks through your life, things you learn that you didn't know before. Why did you write the book?
Well, you know, Mark, over these last few years, Florida has really represented freedom in the United States. And we've seen that with a number of people, unprecedented number of people that have picked up their lives from a lot of these failing states governed by leftist politics, and they've come to Florida. And so they've told me just how glad they are to be in Florida. You've seen other states that have followed Florida and done well, others that haven't and done poorly. But people would always say to me, you know, I just wish our country would be doing what Florida is doing, that Florida really shows American principles put into action with courage and conviction can work. And so what we talk about is a lot of the stuff that we encountered coming into office, a lot of the issues that we tackled, but then kind of where the dividing lines are in current American society and how I think we have the best arguments for the direction that not only states but the country should go in.
Well, I'll tell you what I found interesting about the book. It's not a typical politician's book. It's written like an American citizen, how you started, how you developed your career, what decisions you made, and so forth. The other thing I noticed is there's not gossip in the book. There's not telltale things in the book. There's not, you don't really attack in the book, and so forth and so on. Was that intentional?
Well, look, I actually wrote it. As you know, most elected officials aren't actually writing their books. I mean, you write all yours, but it's not an easy thing to do. But I think it comes across as more authentic because it is me writing this. And I also don't believe in some of the gossip stuff. It's like if you and I would have had a private conversation 3 years ago, why should I regurgitate that and put that out there when you were talking to me in confidence? And so I try to focus on the policies, the principles, and then a lot about what does it mean to be a leader in this day and age? Because as you know, Mark, when you're standing for our values, you come under assault in American society. It's not just from leftist elected officials. Of course, you've got to battle them. You've got woke ideology taking over so many of these different institutions, corporate America, our bureaucracy, universities, that if you're standing for the right things, you're going to have to show courage under fire if you ultimately want to bring this stuff in for a landing. And so we had to do that so many different times. And I just felt that's something that I think people are going to be more interested in than me kind of dishing about private conversations I may have had with somebody that people know.
You're conservative? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think the foundation of it is understanding the American project. Our rights come from God, not from the government. The founders rejected the divine right of kings, and it used to be some people did have rights, but it was a courtesy of the state. So that's not how our system works. We have these God-given rights. We loan power to the government under a constitution to protect those rights. And I think that what we've seen in more modern society is we've seen an unmooring of those constitutional foundations. We have an administrative state which is totally out of control. It violates people's freedoms. It's really been weaponized against factions of the country that the ruling class doesn't like. And we need to reconstitutionalize this government. But what we're facing now, I think, is not what the founders intended in terms of how this government should be operating.
These principles are throughout this book. So my question to you is this. You went to Yale. You went to Harvard Law. You grew up under very modest means. You were a great baseball player. But through all this, particularly Yale and Harvard, how did you maintain your principles, faith, belief in God, these conservative principles? Was it your parents? What was it?
Well, I talk in the book about, so I grew up in a town called Dunedin, Florida, which is in the Tampa, St. Petersburg area. My parents, my father's from Western Pennsylvania, my mother's from Northeastern Ohio. So that is like steel country, that is like blue collar, salt of the earth. And as you know, Mark, Florida is very eclectic. People kind of come from all over. We do have a culture, And so I grew up in that culture, but really it was kind of those Rust Belt values that raised me. I get to Yale. I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't even know colleges were liberal. I mean, I was like 18 years old. I show up my first day, and in Florida, we would wear things like jean shorts, flip-flops, and a t-shirt. So I show up my first day wearing that, and you got kids from Andover and Groton, and I was a fish out of water, and it was a major, major culture shock. I wasn't like a refined conservative in terms of politics, because I was mostly into sports and things like that. But you start sitting in some of these classrooms, and even though one of Yale's mottos is for God, for country, for Yale, sit in the classroom attacking religion, attacking God, attacking the United States. I'm sitting in class and they're saying that the U.S. was to blame for the Cold War, not Joseph Stalin. So this is and I had never experienced that because growing up in Dunedin, I didn't know if people were Republican or Democrat. You know, you had both of them, but everyone kind of believed in the core American principles. And so that was my exposure to the left. And I think what it did for me was it was so different from what I thought was appropriate that I wasn't influenced by it in terms of it pulling me in that direction. I rebelled the other way. So by the time I got through college and law school, I was definitely set. Although when I was running for Congress, I kind of tell the story in the book. I was green. I had never run before. You know, I had kind of an impressive resume. I had served in Iraq and done things. So there were things that conservative primary voters would like. But, you see Yale and Harvard, that is like people say liberal elitist stuff. And so the question was, how do I prove that I'm actually mean what I say? And I was like, listen, how many people that you know go up to Washington, they say they're going to do these things, and then the swamp co-opts them and they end up not following principle? Well, listen, look at me. I got through Yale and Harvard and came out more conservative than when I went in. The swamp's going to have nothing on that, and they appreciated that. But I always told myself, none of this will fly in the real world because you get out there, this is all just pie in the sky stuff. Well, I think though the joke was actually on me because I think what we see with a lot of the woke ideology and all these institutions in society, this is a reflection of what a lot of these universities have produced over the last generation. And so we're reaping a lot of what was sowed in those classrooms 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago.
I want to circle back to that. But you graduated with honors from Yale. Then you go to Harvard Law School. It's like, oh my God. Same thing happens there. But then you decide to go in the military. What was that all about?
Well, I graduated college before 9/11, and I just remember growing up in like the 90s. Cold War was over. We didn't have a care in the world, probably at the height of our power as a country looking back on it. And then 9/11 happened, and just the world changed, and we were engaged in conflict in Afghanistan, pending in Iraq, and I just felt like that I should serve. We didn't have a draft. I didn't get paid by the Navy to join my education or anything like that. It was just something that I wanted to do, so we volunteered to do it. I commissioned while I was at Harvard. Ended up starting my career down in Northeast Florida, Naval Station Mayport, eventually did stints in places like Iraq, and just as a volunteer with that too. I mean, I was not mobilized to deploy to Iraq, but they needed people, so I raised my hand and say, hey, send me, I'll go. And I just respected the country so much. I respected people that had served. My grandfather was in World War II, and I just thought it was something I should do.
Now, I would tell the audience, all of this is in this brand new book that comes out on Tuesday. You can get it from Amazon.com right now. The Courage to Be Free, Florida's Blueprint for America's Revival. We're in a culture war. We didn't start it, but what I call the Marxist left, they started it. It is devouring our institutions. It is devouring our politics. It's devouring the private sector. You have CRT, critical race theory. You have DIE or DEI, you have ESG, and all of a sudden I feel like it's just piling on top of us. This is something you obviously as governor have noticed in the classrooms, the sexualizing of little kids. Disney, Walt Disney has to be rolling in his grave right now, what's happened to Disneyland and Disney World, and these other events in the culture too. You've kind of taken the lead in taking this on as far as governors go. Tell me about that. What caused you to say, I got to do something about this?
Well, think about it, Mark. So, I got reelected November 2022. largest vote that any Republican governor in Florida history has got, largest vote margin any governor candidate's ever got, 1.5 million votes. I can win by 1.5 million votes, make the Democratic Party in our state basically a rotten carcass on the side of the street. And yet, the left can still impose their agenda on my people if I'm not looking after fighting ESG and other woke companies and some of the stuff going on in the universities and the schools. And so I think I have an understanding that these fights are far broader than just one particular election. Yes, you do have to fight the woke in the halls of government and in legislative chambers. And we have supermajorities as Republicans in Florida, so we will win all those fights. But you also have to be willing to defend your folks against this agenda being shoved down their throat from all these other institutions where these people aren't necessarily coming up for elections. So you talk about things with like the young kids and with Disney. And I see that not just through the eyes of a governor, but also through the eyes of a dad. You know, we have a 6, a 4, and a 2-year-old at home, and we just believe as parents, we should be able to send our kids to school, have them watch cartoons without having somebody's sexual agenda shoved down their throats. And so when this issue came up with the sexualization of the curriculum, of course in Florida, we think that that's inappropriate. And you know what? Republican, Democrat, Independent parents agree with us overwhelmingly, but this was something that the left tried to spin up, the media tried to spin up, and then Disney, I think mistakenly, got involved with that. And you know what? The left was smart to try to pressure Disney because for 60 years in the state of Florida, they have gotten every single thing they want from the state of Florida until I became governor. And we said, no, you're not running the state of Florida, we're running the state of Florida. So we not only were able to institute those protections for our students, we also said, you know, this company, Disney, was granted by the state of Florida 60 years ago its own government. Not just favorable regulation, they controlled their own government in Central Florida. And so we said that is not going to work. If a company is going to go down the road of thinking that this stuff should be in their programming, you cannot have a relationship where you're joined at the hip with that company. So we've taken away their self-governing status, making them live under the same laws as everybody else and making them pay their fair share of taxes and to honor all their debts. And that's just, I think, good government when you're defending your folks like that. And incidentally, media attacked me for doing the Disney stuff. They said, oh, it's going to hurt him in the election. Well, the county that most Disney employees live in, Osceola County, historically Democrat county, Republican hasn't won it in a while, we carried it by 7 points.
The book is The Courage to Be Free by Governor DeSantis, Florida's Blueprint for America's Revival. We can't cover everything in here. We're covering some of the issues, as you can see. You can get it now at Amazon.com. You can get it in any bookstore starting Tuesday, but if you want to jump ahead and grab a copy right now, I would do it.